I'm pretty surprised by both of your lists. I think they are terrible.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Taste Like Music. Jason, Joe, and Crams are here. Hall & Oates week on the channel. This is a Patreon pick back from May. It's taken us a while to get around to it. The next couple listographies you see are going to be us plowing through this backlog of Patreon winners. But yeah, a decent number of albums to get through. 18.
It's my fault, by the way, everyone, that we're backed up. I don't even have time to shave or cut my hair, obviously. So,
All right, so I have a decent amount of exposure to Hall & Oates. My dad was a big fan of Hall & Oates and owned the vast majority of their albums, mostly on vinyl, a few on CD. So I heard them just by proxy a lot. I never really got deep into them myself, so I don't know the albums that intimately, but I knew quite a bit of this. How about you guys?
zero. Never considered them an albums band ever. Knew the names of maybe 3 of these albums. So this was all basically brand new. And I never really loved any of their singles or their hits. Liked, yes. Loved, no. They've never made a playlist or an old CD of mine, so I was not excited to get into the back catalog. So we'll see how I reacted to that.
Sounds like hell for Cramser. I'm a huge Hall & Oates singles guy, but I've never considered them like an albums artist. Like I was never, even though I love Kiss on my list, I wasn't like, oh yeah, I must listen to Voices or whatever. So I'm trying to think if I'd even heard a whole album of theirs before we did the 82 deep dive. I listened to H2O, and like I knew of their albums, some of them, but like some of those 70 albums, I was like, what the hell is this? Beauty on a Back Street? Is this it's a real album? Was this what we're doing here? So it was interesting to kind of complete the puzzle of Hall & Oates and get into some of the albums.
All right, so let's do it. We've got 18, so groups of 4, 2 groups of 4 until we get to the top 10. Then we'll go one by one. Who's kicking off?
I'll probably kick off because it's going to be dark. We should end on the good stuff. If you watch the 63 albums video that I did, coincidentally, you voted was the best video. Um, I'm changing my ratings language. I am just using like, not good, and that stuff. So we're starting off at 18, 1.5 things I hated. Change of season, number 18. Trading in the awful, shallow, kind of new Jack Swing sound they did before this for kind of power pop and rock ballads. Still failing at it. They have no idea how badly they need Todd Rundgren. So Close was a minor hit. Seems like that song could have been like trying to get on the Karate Kid Part 3 soundtrack, but after 15 seconds, they were like, no, this is not good enough. It's really bad cheese, just unbearable, like Hallmark greeting card type sentiments. For a band that I, you know, don't have a taste for, I've always respected their craft and was impressed by the professionalism. But this era, I don't have any of that. So we're at 1.5. I hated it. I also hated number 17. Oh, yeah. 1.5. Hated it. Big new Jack Swing kind of bass, late 80s feel. Get those like electric dancey guitar tones, a la like In Excess. But they don't have the charisma or the style to pull this off. They're just mimicking everything. They're clearly behind the curve. They're like in love with Bobby Brown or something. And it's like, why would you translate that into your own recording? I'm in Pieces is just so sappy with that big sax and synthetic bass. Missed Opportunity is just awful, and Soul Love, which every like article I've read about this album was like it's a terrible album except for Soul Love, which saves it. It's like what? This is just like awful pseudo reggae mix, like full of like that mixed tropical drink culture. So in love with the movie Cocktail, I hate it. The whole thing is just so fake and un of themselves. Horrific attempt to stay relevant. Number 16, I'm still at 1.5. I've got Beauty on the Back Street. I hated it. Don't Change is cool, a bit icy, guitar heavy. That's nice. Seems like a prelude to this is Kiss on my list. Why do lovers break each other's hearts? Really lame. I hate when he goes, I never know why. Just the sentiments on this album and in their catalog in general are so fluffy and empty and meaningless to me. You Must Be Good for Something is pretty bad. It's just an ugly composition. Then you get Emptiness, which is like a dramatic and good composition, but just kind of goofy vocal delivery. Love Hurts is lifeless. This is a very bland album by a mostly bland artist, so that's not good. And to cap off the bottom four, I'm still at 1.5. I hated a lot of this. I've got Our Kind of Soul. For God's sakes, how many times have we done this? And I keep saying it, it's a broken record. These artists that just are like, I'm going to go do a covers album, things that influence me and go back to my roots. None of these need to be redone. And I didn't know a lot of these tracks. So I went back and listened to them. And yeah, none of these needed to be done. They completely water down all of the old vibrancy and like life that these original recordings have. Just completely missed the mark on these songs, but like, why do it? 1.5. Those are my bottom four. And I ain't done with 1.5s.
Well, you're completely out of your mind with one of those. I mean, that's just insane, especially when the worst album you haven't even mentioned, and that would be my number 18, Do It for Love, which is just the absolute nadir of 2000s production. It's produced like it was like Backstreet Boys, like Savage Garden record. Like the amount of like Stardust chimes in that album is just absolutely, it's like a goddamn parody. Like I couldn't believe how many times they did that stupid Stardust little chimey thing. It just totally blew my mind. The only like semi-competent thing on the whole album is the cover of Someday We'll Know, and it's still bad. And it features Todd Rundgren for some reason. But yeah, this was by far the low point for me. I have it at 1 star, and it's up there with like those Blondie comeback albums for like the absolute worst thing I think I've heard. It's not quite as bad as Boston's like low points, but it's like just a little bit above. It was really bad. 17, Our Kind of Soul, completely just, I don't want to use the R word, but they just mess up all these great soul classics. They are just complete abortions. And for a band that like traded on being a blue-eyed soul group to miss this bad on a bunch of, I mean, the actual selections are awesome. Like they could have done this semi-competently. Even like Phil Collins level would have been okay, but like this is lower than all that, and that is a damn shame. Love TKO, the just a atrocity. And there's a couple of new songs, and they're just as bad, if not worse. Number 16, that one's 1.5 star. So starting off real bad, even below Cramser, if you can believe it. But it's not going to stay there. Home for Christmas is my number 16. It's good. You get that Christmas album out of the way down at the bottom. Cramser's number 1. Just really boring. Like the song selections are really boring. Bunch of like orchestrations that are just boring. Neither of them can really sing at this point, it seems like. So just completely cash grab. Number 15, I'm up to 2.5 stars for Ooh Yeah. I don't know if it's Oh Yeah or Ooh Yeah. Great question of our time. It's more like yeah. You were saying Bobby Brown. I can see that like little New Jack Swing, but it's got like that literal, just generic late 80s drum and dance beat sound. Like everything is just like really stereotypical for the time. They throw in a bunch of like hair metal solos for no reason, and it's just not good. There's nothing on here that I would come back to, or even one of those like juicy poppy Hall & Oates singles. Nothing there.
All right. Well, we're all pretty much in the same ballpark except for that one crazy placement of Cramps. My number 18 is Home for Christmas. It is what it is, and without hearing it what it is. It's fine. It's nice. But, if these are the last records that they make, it's kind of a creative whimper to go out on a covers album and a Christmas album. And I don't know, there's nothing really wrong with it, but I only need about 6 Christmas records in my life. So you need to be like one of the 6 best Christmas albums ever to be worth it for me. And I'm just never going to listen to this ever again. 2 stars for me. Number 17 is Our Kind of Soul. 3 original songs, 14 covers. I kind of get them wanting to do this, but if they were going to do it, they waited a little too long. Daryl, I think at this point, starting to sound a little older. His voice isn't bad here necessarily, but it's starting to deepen a little. And so I don't think it achieves what it maybe aims to do, which is kind of like put Daryl in the conversation of the all-time great vocalists. And that's a swing and a miss. I do think he's a great singer. In his prime, he's amazing, but the production is so stale and sterile here. It's just pretty lifeless. So that is also 2 stars for me. Let's see, number 16. I don't think either of you guys talked about this one yet, but I'm going Marigold Sky. The song Promise Ain't Enough was a big hit apparently in South America and Southeast Asia, but I don't think it did much damage on the US charts, and the album only managed to get to number 95. It's just really bland. It's super safe adult contemporary. It's kind of pleasing sounding enough, but nothing sticks. None of the songs are really that good. I think this is maybe like one of their worst collections of songs because there's nothing memorable on it at all. It's kind of the music you would hear played in a bookstore or something like Borders in the late 90s, but yeah, not very good. The vocals still sound all right, but that's about all it has going for it. The songs themselves are pretty plain. So that's my number 16. That's 2 stars as well. And then my number 15 is Change of Season, also 2 stars. So close, pretty far off from being good. And considering the people playing on it too, you've got Waddy Wachell and Danny Korchmar and Ben Montench, and you got a co-write from Bon Jovi on there. But man, not very good. Pretty plain. You guys both mentioned in talking about the kind of like Madonna, Whitney Houston kind of 80s pop sound, which that is what it is. You either like that or you don't. But here they trade that in for just a way flatter, plain sound. It sounds more like Bryan Adams or something. Just completely uninteresting. Plus, you've got tons and tons of outside writers, way more than they had on any of their previous records. So I think that maybe that contributes to the lack of personality on this album. Just very vanilla, just very adult contemporary, which isn't necessarily that far removed from what they had always been doing. They'd always been close to that. But I don't know, like even at their worst through the 80s, at times, they would try to like be relevant and do something like really unhip, but at least they seem to have some connection to what was happening culturally around them. And here they're just kind of settling into, anonymity and just like we're going to be what we're going to be, and this is all we're going to do from here on out. And so this is the beginning of the end for Hall & Oates. 2 stars.
Okay, I did something wrong. I reacted to you saying that Daryl Hall was one of the all-time great singers with just like this terrible grimace. And I will say that he is a very good singer. I just don't feel anything when he sings. I don't like the sound of his voice. I think he is the most vanilla, plain singer of all time to me. And he is like a studio musician singer, which is not a thing because your voice has to be the most communicative thing going on the record. He does nothing for me as a singer. I am impressed with him as a singer. Those 2 things can both exist. So I will not bash Daryl Hall much throughout this show, but I don't like him as a singer, if that makes sense. Now for my other crazy take for my bottom albums, and I'm still at 1.5. I hated this album. I've got H2O. Other than Water, there's never been a good H2O. The Halloween sequel is terrible. This album is terrible. They're still capitalizing off the same sound and framework of the early 80s albums. It's a successful run, and they kept it going. I get it. G.E. Smith of the old Saturday Night Live band on lead guitar here, doing a lot of heavy lifting. Kind of a reason why he became the leader of the Saturday Night Live band. He's a fine guitar player, but doesn't really have a brand or anything like that. Maneater leading off. I've never really liked it. I don't dislike it, but unfortunately, a song that is incredibly popular that I'm just kind of on is easily the highlight of this album. A lot of these are just so plain and boring. The dinky little keyboard part on Crime Pays seems to go on forever, but it's actually just like 28.5 seconds. Art of Heartbreak is really puny. It's hard to find stuff for me that's worse than familiar, safe pop music that is neither catchy or memorable, and that's H2O to me. Lots of drum machines and loops that go nowhere. I think they're at their best when they've got a little bit of that marriage of like the well played instruments of like the folk kind of soul fusion they got. But they abandoned that here. Like One on One is so tacky and uninteresting. It sounds like Daryl Hall in the shower with a random sample he found on YouTube and nothing else. Family Man, really lame. Just everything so neutered and tame. Like, just I feel like at their worst, this is a band and with nothing to say. And really, even the songs I like, they're just pop music fluff. And also, like, what the hell is Italian Girls? What a weird song. Just the worst of 80s kind of lack of substance music. And this album lacks excess and brash overconfidence, which is like what's cool about 80s pop music. It's just happy and content with itself for no reason. Number 13, I've got Do It for Love, and I'm up to 2 stars, which means I really didn't like it. It's got a contemporary 2002 feel, but like a little bit of writing sense of their 80s period. But the whole thing is a big clash because, like Joe said, Savage Garden is the exact band I didn't think of writing down, but that is exactly who, like, that's what it is. It's surprisingly interesting at sometimes. There's a lot of acoustic guitar and very little flashbulbs going off a la 2002. I didn't remember hearing any record scratching, which is a nice thing for a 2002 album. Man on a Mission is decent, but that might be the highlight. The title track is okay. You know, they got that adult contemporary rock. There's been a lot of bands that have done this album between like 98 and '03 after being around for 25 years, and they just dive headfirst into this crap production and put their little bit of sprinkles on it, and they're like bringing their blue-eyed soul, but it's still just one of the worst eras of pop rock production. We've talked so much about it. The acoustic guitar part and She Got Me Bad is the most 2002 thing ever. It's just got like that butterfly R&B, like little sweet pick action to it. Are there great songs on it? No. Are there good songs on it? No. There's a lot of cringeworthy moments, like the sensual boy band stuff, a la Savage Garden, the aforementioned She Got Me Bad, Breath of Your Life, just terrible. Number 12, I've got Marigold Sky. I'm still at 2 stars. I really didn't like it. It's pretty tacky, but it is less sufferable than my previous entries. And there's definitely some better production musicianship. The album is like a gauntlet of everything that Hall & Oates has ever touched, which is a lot. The title track is like folk rock done up with a lot of gloss, a lot of adult alternative kind of stuff. It's crazy. Some songs feel like leftovers from the 80s. Some songs sound like they're like Sheryl Crow, like type wannabe songs. It's 1997, so you know you don't get a single track cut from the list. They maybe even gone like, hey, we got 10 tracks. You got room for 2 more? Just come up with some stuff. It's pretty lousy. I really didn't like it. And then number 11, I've got Home for Christmas. Don't worry. It's not number 1. It's number 11. Good songs. Christmas songs are good songs. I'm not religious. I find these tales as fantastical as the Harry Potter series, maybe even more so, but they are full of compassion and feeling and love and generally are catchy and have, a lot of melody to it. They do it decently. I do kind of like the softer swings with like, or softer strings with like the overture and First Noel, kind of bookending that with Oh Holy Night, mostly soft rock approach, but they don't go off the deep end with stuff. It's a unique track list too. But Jason's right. Like, I'm giving it some praise because they're Christmas songs and I like Christmas songs. But yeah, 6 Christmas albums you ever need? Maybe 3. Like, I don't know. How many do you need? So nothing I would go back to. I really didn't like it, but I liked it a lot more than some of the others. And we'll do the top 10 shortly.
Well, I'm glad it didn't get into the top 10. That would be something. Number 14, I'm gonna go with Marigold Sky. I'm at a very high 2.5 stars for that one. I was thinking about three, but I'm just no, I'm never gonna think about it again. I do think for 1997, it's pretty decent. I think it sounds way better than anything after it. 1,000 times better than the 2000s albums. Romeo's Bleeding has an interesting like rock and guitar solo to kick things off, which is interesting. It's either David Stewart from Eurythmics or some guy named Ken Sebeski. So I thought that was kind of interesting. And that was the highlight mostly. I don't think the songs are bad, but they're just not memorable, neither good, memorable, nor bad memorable. So it's just sort of anonymous sounding. The only time I was like, that's kind of interesting, other than that guitar solo, was Throw the Roses Away, which sounds a lot like Boys to Men, kind of that big gospel feel. So I thought, okay, maybe they're going for like a 90s Philly soul sound on this one. And they should have. They should have just done a whole album like that song and like Boys to Men. That would be kind of a fun updating. But they didn't, and it's all I'm ever going to talk about Marigold Sky ever again in my life. Number 13, we go with Change of Season from 1990. This one sounds like Bryan Adams mostly. It's another anonymous sounding record. I think it sounds decent for 1990, but Big Bam Boom was 1984, and that was the last time they had like any like sense of what was like cool and still kind of in fashion. By 1990, they're completely out of it. Like you can't stay relevant for a third decade. That's really tough, and I wouldn't expect Hall and Oates to be the band that broke that streak. So you just go to when you're out of like ideas, you just, hey, we're gonna do adult contemporary now, and they do a decent job at it. I have it at the lowest 3 stars that you can possibly have. Um, Number 12, Big Bam Boom from 1984. I think this was pretty lousy, pretty big step down from H2O. Other than the singles, I do think Out of Touch is pretty magnificent for a pop song. I just love the way it kind of like leisurely comes in, that synth part. Method of Modern Love is decent, but there's songs like Rocket to God, which is, swear to God, one of the worst songs in their whole catalog. And like it's clearly the end of the run. Like you can see the wheels just completely blown off. They had a hell of a 10, 11, 12 years of great good to great songs and albums, but that is the end right there. Big Bam Boom from 84. Number 11, uh we gotta venture into the classic period now. And I think the low point is Ecstatic from 1979. uh David Foster came in on Along the Red Ledge, and at that point he wasn't quite like full on David Foster. Ecstatic sounds like Chicago, like the Chicago David Foster era, where it's just like, oof, like they become like a full on kind of like soppy, cheesy, Peter Cetera ballad after Peter Cetera ballad kind of thing. And this, it's sort of like infecting their sound in a negative way on Ecstatic. They move away from the session musicians. They bring in G.E. Smith, John Siegler on bass, Jerry Marotta on drums, and Charles DeChant on sax, sort of like the classic Hall & Oates backing band. But this one, it doesn't quite come all the parts don't gel. Wait for Me is pretty good. It's a pretty strong single, but The Woman Comes and Goes has that like terrible Chicago like trademark piano sound. The sax is way too smooth. And I think they go in the right direction after this, but Ecstatic was like a weird like one-off where it just didn't work at all. And wisely they abandoned Mr. David Foster after this one. So 3 stars for Ecstatic.
My number 14 is Do It for Love, and Joe is not wrong about this. The production on it is exactly that sound that we all seem to hate from the early 2000s. But I do think of like the later period records, I think this one does have the best songwriting. So I think it's kind of like weighing, but in ranking these bottom 5, it's kind of like weighing production against songwriting. And this is the only one of those records where there's a few songs where you could say the title to me and I could think of what the song sounds like in my head. All of the other ones, there is nothing that's stuck at all. So for that reason, I put it ahead of the others. Do It for Love has a pretty catchy chorus. Someday we'll know, the presence of Todd makes it, decent. None of it's great, but again, it has some melodies that I can recall. So 2 stars for Do It for Love. All right. Then everything prior to those last 5 records, Change of Season onward, I think everything prior to that is kind of up for grabs, and you could order them a bunch of different ways. For me, the worst of all of those is Ecstatic, and some of Joe's comments about it basically took the words out of my mouth. The one before this, Along the Red Ledge, does not seem like David Foster production. When you think of David Foster production, you think of like those 80s Chicago records and stuff like that. And my first listen through, I wasn't looking at who produced everything, and I was shocked to see that he did that before this, because this record is like a hard, line in the sand where the production changes, and it's very clearly a different sound and not working for me too much. It's got to be one of the most 80s sounding albums of the 70s. Yeah, I don't know. This is kind of where the transformation of them is completed into a full-fledged pop act, exemplified by the ballad Wait For Me, which I love, actually. I think it's really good, but not much else here works at all. Portable Radio, I think, is pretty lame. The chorus of All You Want Is Heaven sounds like an 80s TV theme song. Who Said the World Was Fair also does, but that one's actually a little catchy, but there's so much like super bouncy, like rubber band slap bass on this record. It's crazy. You get the reggae infused pop of Number One, which doesn't work at all. You get the really weird Halifron and Intravino pairing to close the record, which Halifron is like this weird synth instrumental. And then you get this, I don't even know what to call it. It's like this new wave rocker that's about how much he likes wine. It's a really weird song. I just don't think the songs here are very good. I think the production's pretty cheesy, the writing and the sound. Not much of it works. I think Wait For Me is great, and that's about all this record is good for. So I got this at 2.5 stars. Definitely a step up from those last 5, but not by that much. Number 12, I've got Voices, which maybe is controversial, but I also think that this record has like similar problems that Ecstatic has. So this is the record that really blew them up. I mean, they had hits before this, and a lot of records. This is what, their 9th record, so they'd been around. But this is where they kind of like elevate to superstardom. This was 100 weeks in the top 200, bunch of big singles, couple number ones, I think. And I don't know. I think it's a little bit of a weird record. There's some good stuff on it. I love the opener, How Does It Feel to Be Back, the John Oates song. Super weird to open the record, super weird first single, but I like it. I like the laid back feel of it. And then, I don't know, like, I understand Make My Dreams and Kiss on My List. Those are obvious hits, and I understand why they were hits. And like, clearly you hear those and you know that they're going to be hits. But I just don't think there's a lot of depth on the writing. I think there's some of the shallower singles that they've got. I don't think the writing's that interesting on this record. And musically, I don't think there's that much going on. And then outside of those singles, a good chunk of this record is also them like trying to be like weird, quirky, new wave rockers. And I just don't think they're very good at that. And then also you've got this weird cover. I don't know why they're covering You've Lost That Loving Feeling. Like they know in their mind that they've done too much of this new wave stuff and they have to like appease their soul fans. So they throw this cover on there. then you've got Every Time You Go Away, which is pretty good, the original version of that song, but it's so oddly sequenced. These styles like bounce around. Africa is a real rough one, I think one of the worst. And then Diddy Doo-Wop is a bizarre closer. I just think the whole record is all over the place. The production is kind of rough, and it just seems like they don't know what they're doing. And it feels like they're just stumbling around and managed to bump into like a few amazing like all-timer singles. It's just seems like accidental. So 2.5 stars for that. All right. And then my number 11 is Big Bam Boom. This one was produced by Bob Clearmountain. I think it's pretty easily their most maximalist album. Bob Clearmountain seems to be aiming for that Mutt Lange, Trevor Horn type of like a million things happening at once type of 80s production sound. And Bob Clearmountain's amazing. So sonically, I think it's very good. As far as that 80s production sound goes, I think it's up there among the best of them. But does that pair that well with Hall & Oates? Not that much. And are the songs really good? Not too many of them. I don't think this sort of very hyper frenetic 80s production plays to their strengths enough. I don't think it highlights the vocals enough. You got like the spelling chorus on Method of Modern Love, I think is really bad. Plus it's on top of that really like clangy rhythm. There's no soul really going on. There's not a lot of feeling on this record. The beginning of Going Through the Motions is terrible with those like vocal samples being triggered or whatever's happening there. It sounds so dated and corny. John Oates, I like his writing. I think he's usually good for like a nice little touch of variety on the record, bringing something different and interesting in. His track, his lone solo writing credit on this record, Cold, Dark, and Yesterday, I think is one of the worst songs he wrote for the duo. So yeah, just not great. Out of Touch is great. I love that. I think it's a great pop song. But yeah, kind of like Ecstatic. That's like the one track that's worth much of anything here. So 2.5 for Big Bam Boom.
Right. My number 10 is going to be Daryl Hall and John Oates. 2 stars. I really didn't like it. They gave Todd Rundgren one run as a producer and then went back to their sweet, clean little guy next door sound. Blue Eyed Soul is just not for me. However, I'm glad that Joe mentioned Phil Collins earlier and was like, it's not Phil Collins level. I have such more appreciation for Phil Collins after doing this. It's absolutely remarkable. Camelia's all right. They're just back to being these good little behaved boys. Like they have nothing to say ever, in my opinion. And their pop music isn't that good, and their sound is very bland. And you said the one album or songs off of it sounded like 80s sitcom theme songs. That's like 96% of their catalog to me. Like their songs are made for opening credits. That's all I hear when I listen to them. They've got that fuzzy, warm, non-threatening early 80s sound. This obviously is in the early 80s, but it's the roots are here. Sarah Smile was a big hit for them. I really don't see it. Alone Too Long, just also boring. The rhythm section and the playing is cool and even kind of really good and hot at times, but the vocals and the melodies, they just aren't on the same ride. They just contrast for me. Frankly, it's just boring. I'm not a Blue Eyed Soul guy. Out of Me, Out of You is so forced and lame to me. Nothing at all brings nothing at all to the table. There's some cool drum work on it. That's about it. Gino the Manager, maybe my favorite on the record. It sounds like something Rundgren would maybe have wanted to play around with. And my dog's name is Gino, so that was nice. Like when he goes off on the Gino no nos, it's kind of cool. And like there's a little bit of flavor there and some passion and power. Ennui on the Mountain, it's okay. It's got that 50s doo-wop milkshake romance feel. There's just nothing exciting or catchy to me in a lot of their catalog, and to me, this album is that way from start to finish. So, number 10, Daryl Hall and John Oates.
Little victories. Your dog and the title of that song. Glad you could have that with Hall & Oates there. My number 10, let me go back to the beginning with Whole Oats, which is a weird. I mean, it's the first one, so I guess it wasn't weird, but to hear all the other songs and to know the songs and the singles and to hear all the other albums, and you hear this one, it's just like a completely different experience. It's basically them trying to be like America or like a folk duo sometimes. Like it's really odd to hear a lot of like pastoral finger picked guitars and folky back and forth singing. But there's some lovely melodies. There's a couple tracks with pedal steel on it. It's not, I mean, it's not like some revelation where it's like, oh my God, like they invented this new folk rock sound, and you got to go listen to the real Hall and Oates back in 72. No, it's just competent, nice sounding folk rock with like a tiny little undercurrent of the blue-eyed soul and the Philly soul that they would, get to the very next year. So it's an interesting record to listen to. And I like lead off track I'm Sorry, and Fall in Philadelphia is pretty nice. Southeast City Window, that's the one that really sounds like America, but it's nice too. I mean, these are nice, pleasant songs, but it's not their wheelhouse, and it's not something that I would listen to for, you know, the best of folk rock. I'm not going back to Hall and Oates here. So 3.5 stars, a low 3.5 stars for Whole Oats.
Whole Oats is my number 10 as well. Every review of this talks about the R&B influence, which is still there. It always is there with them, but it's on almost equal footing, like Joe said, with like the 70s singer-songwriter movement. And I don't know, it's like not enough of either comes through, maybe. It's just kind of like stuck in no man's land in the middle a little bit. It's not super catchy, it's not super groovy, it's not super soulful, and I don't think the writing really is really profound. Like, yeah, they can do this folky thing, but you have to up your writing if you're going to really put the focus on songwriting. So I don't know. For me, it's not quite there. It's pretty polite soft rock. It's pretty well sung, pretty well produced, but nothing sticks out that much. The middle of the record, especially, I think things sag a little bit. A lot of really slow tempos, a lot of quiet songs with really sparse arrangements. Songs like Lazy Man and They Needed Each Other and Thank You For. I think those songs really kind of weigh down the middle of the record. Early 70s singer-songwriter stuff is usually my jam, but there are countless artists I think that do it better than Hall & Oates, and I think they were right to go in more of an R&B direction and push that a little more in their sound. It's not a terrible listen or anything. It's just not essential. So for me, a light 3 stars.
My number 9, I've got Ecstatic. I've got it at 2 stars. I really didn't like it. I did kind of dig The Woman Comes and Goes, though. I feel like most of their albums have a song where I'm like, okay. And then that's it. I get a little bit more sleaziness on this album, which I like. A little less polite, like Jason just mentioned. And I think it's a little bit closer to their sound of their 80s hits than a lot of stuff before it. So a little bit of disco in the rhythm section, but still that plastic blue-eyed soft rock pop, super radio friendly, like Wait For Me, which Jason said is great. It is not a great song. Let's use our adjectives properly. It's a fine song. I mean, like Rocket Man by Elton John is a great song. This is not a great song. But yeah, a little bit look into like the discotheque future with portable radio. The bass is rocking on this album, probably a little too much, but it's there. I won't lie, it's a little enjoyable, the excess bass. All You Want Is Heaven is pretty catchy, starting to really recognize some of their rhythm and melody tendencies, getting a little bit replicated, but it's okay. Getting a little bit of like Latin jazz fusion kind of percussion injections at times. Who Said the World is Fair is a little fun. Running from Paradise is too heavy on the bass, and it's really annoying that it's just too much. And again, the vocals just like match nothing for me. It's really congested, ugly melody, trying to get way too cute with it. Then you get number 1, which is like reggae police kind of fare. And I think Daryl Hall, who I'm not crazy about, even like objectively drops the ball a little bit on this album on the mic. A lot of cool ideas, I think, on this album, but pretty poor execution, which is a shame. I think kind of their idea for this album was there, but didn't really get flushed out properly. So still at 2 stars for Ecstatic.
Number 9 for me is an album that has gone up in my estimation slightly. I got H2O, which in our 82 deep dive was at 7.9, which is just off the 4 star mark. I'm giving it the 4 stars. I'm moving it up. Point 0.1 scores an 8, 4 stars. It's 4 stars from here on out for me. H2O is a very fun record. And I love the way it starts off with Man Eater. I love that slinky bass. Just a really fun song. The way it explodes into the verse with that snare hit or whatever. I think it's just an excellently written, performed song. I love Charles DeChant's sax solo, the way he kind of echoes himself. So it's a great song. I love it. One on One, also a really fun song. I think Family Man, which is a cover of a Mike Oldfield song, is pretty decent too. I think the singles very solid. Um, and I love the sports puns in One on One. They're so lame, but it just works really well because they're kind of lame and they know it and they kind of embrace it, which is why you have a song like Italian Girls, which is super lame, but it's a lot of fun. It's definitely one of my 10 favorite songs written by John Oates. So good that that's on there. Pasta Basta. It's become somewhat of a thing in our Discord. I don't know why. But it's fine. It's fun. Open All Night has a nice sweaty guitar solo. I love the cover. It's one of my favorite covers of all time. Just Hall and Oates just staring in each other's eyes, just covered in sweat. Fantastic. And there's a bunch of other songs that don't really, I can't really remember anything about them, but the hits and Italian Girls, it's enough. It's enough to get it to 4 stars. It sounds good. It's still them. And if you like Hall and Oates, if you like the way they sing and sound, and you like the band, there's nothing like way out of bounds here compared to Voices and um, Private Eyes. So solid 4 stars for H2O for me.
All right. My number 9 is Ooh Yeah from 1988. And I knew the reputation of it. I knew that this is kind of like where people saw them as like where they fell off. And with how I felt about Big Bam Boom, I expected this to not be very good. And I was pleasantly surprised. I actually enjoyed it quite a bit. This is their first record with Arista. You get a lot of that in the sound. Like if you know the other artists on Arista at the time, like you get that Whitney Houston sound. You even have Narada Michael Walden on there, like doing some programming. And I don't know exactly what he's doing on the record. I don't think much, but he's around. And you get a lot of things that remind you of that era on this record. It's also, I think, one of the most Todd-esque albums in their catalog. This really reminds me a lot of his late 80s and early 90s stuff. The singing on it, especially, and also just like the harmony and the different chord changes and stuff. It sounds a lot like his writing from that same time period. It's starting to get into that adult contemporary world, but even though there's a lot going on, I think it does put the focus on their vocals. It's got a little R&B to it. I'm in Pieces, I think, is great. It's not their coolest or their most interesting record, but I think it does have some of Daryl's best vocal performances. And I think throughout song-wise, it's pretty consistent, even if it's lacking the highs of some of their earlier stuff. Maybe my expectations were just super low on it, but it far exceeded them. So 3.5 stars for Ooh Yeah.
Absolute, just crazy nonsense there. Just wrong and not what you would have thought Jason would have thought of that album. Number 8, I've got Private Eyes, 2 stars. I didn't like it. Never even really liked the title track. Just doesn't really stick with me. Sounds too much like Kiss on My List, and I prefer Kiss on My List a lot. Bit more keys on this record compared to Voices, I would say, but still in a similar vein of that new wave soft pop rock mesh. Looking for a Good Sign has almost like a Motown chorus to it, and I don't really think the song works. It's too much wannabe soul for me. Like I get the Blue Eyed Soul, but then sometimes they go like trying to be other kind of soul and it doesn't work. I can't go for that. I've never cared for the twinkly little key part. That's cool, but that's about it. The sax doesn't even do it for me. Mono a mono, eh. Like these are nicely crafted pop songs, but I don't really love the beginning of the decade for pop, like the early '80s. Or maybe it's just Hall and Oates. I don't know, but this is not working for me. It's all a bit too corny and warm and fuzzy. Like did it in a minute, despite a cool key lead. It's too lame. Like it's just lame. Nothing to say. Lame, bland, vanilla everywhere. Everything's a vanilla wafer, like a stale one even. Second half of this album is really forgettable. The spunky head above water, that does nothing for me. Really kind of reaching for some rock and falls flat on their face. Tell Me What You Want, Friday Let Me Down, nothing interesting. I didn't hate anything on this album, just really watered down, puny sound from the early '80s. Totally Safe, which is so weird that like we come out of this awesome decade of experimental, like creative kind of stuff with you get like weird art rock stuff and punk in the late '70s, hard rock in the mid '70s, really creative like acid, trippy stuff in the early '70s. And then people were like, we really like this band now. It's like, what? I don't know. I hate it. That's my number 8.
For a guy who loves 80s pop like you do, I guess it's just not enough synths, or I don't know. I don't know what the problem is with these guys. They don't even have that many horns in their stuff. So like, it's not a horn thing like Phil. My number 8, Kranzer had this at 15, whatever, which is ludicrous. I got Beauty on a Back Street from 77. It's hard to talk about Hall & Oates in the late 70s without giving it all away, but I really like their use of session musicians. I think they do it really well. And there's some really just incredible. I didn't realize, I guess I thought like Hall & Oates always had like G.E. Smith and them in the band. So going back through the discography was very interesting. They got Leland Sklar, one of the great bass players of all time, on bass. You got Jeff Porcaro on drums, one of the greatest drummers of all time. So I mean, they're just, you don't think gonna get it for that one. Just these incredible musicians backing them up, and the rhythm section just kicks butt throughout the '70s. And I do prefer the session musicians over the actual band. That was sort of like my main takeaway from this discography. I will take Leland Sklar and Jeff Porcaro over G.E. Smith and the other guys. Like that's probably just obvious to say, but I'm gonna say it. And this, this is like some yacht rock, AM Gold sounds. I love that stuff. So I'm gonna like this album. I think it's very well written and performed. I think Hall and Oates are great singers. I think they sing great together. I like the way they trade off songs. Hall's definitely the more blue-eyed soul romantic, and then you get like these weird little quirky gems from Oates. And I think on this album, probably my favorite Oates compositions in the whole catalog. I think The Emptiness is great. I love the electronic drums played by Jeff Porcaro on here. Some cool like studio trickeration. Like he's kind of branching out and doing some like weird stuff that you wouldn't think of from Hall & Oates. I think it works great. The final track, The Girl Who Used to Be, is like practically like progressive art rock. It's another Oates song that, it's really cool. It's really interesting. I didn't know, like I was more used to like Italian Girls kind of Oates stuff. So it was cool to hear him have this whole other sound to him. Winged Bull has like a little of that Middle Eastern. It's like the yacht rock version of Kashmir. And there's some solid singles. I didn't know any songs from this album coming in, but I think Don't Change is pretty strong. Lead off track, Why Do Lovers Break Each Other's Heart is fun, just good bouncy AM Gold, late '70s pop with a little bit of soul and R&B still creeping in there. They hadn't gone full on pop mode. Bigger Than Both of Us is really boisterous and fun. It kind of reminds me of like Ace or like maybe Chicago, late Chicago stuff, or um, you know, just fun, good-natured yacht rock, and nothing wrong with that at all. And I think it's a good, solid album produced for Christopher Bond. They jumped around to all sorts of producers, but get some Boz Scaggs vibes from this, which I like that too. So I think Beat on the Backstreet, good, solid 4-star record from Hall & Oates here.
All right. My number 8, I'm still at 3.5. I've got H2O. This one went to number 3 on the charts, their highest charting album. And it was their 11th album. They have such a weird trajectory in the way how long it took them. Like they had hits, but I don't know. It's just a weird history. Maneater, 4 weeks at number 1. Not my favorite of their hits, especially on this record, but not terrible. One on One, though, that's a banger. Love it. So minimal, that drum machine and the keys and the bass, and then Daryl's vocals, I think, are excellent on it. Italian Girls, a song I've been talking about a lot, made my top 25 in 1982. Deep Dive, that song has been stuck in my head since then. Just a totally ridiculous song in every conceivable way. It should not work, but I cannot stop listening to it. It's so good. There's a lot of like really kind of cheesy 80s pop on this record, but most of it is pretty fun and it's pretty light and not taking itself too seriously. And it doesn't feel like on some of the previous records, especially Ecstatic and Voices, it doesn't feel like they're trying to be like new wave rockers or like quirky, nerdy synth band or something. It feels like they finally accepted themselves for who they are, and they're just kind of leaning into it. And so I think this record feels a lot more believable than some of the prior records. And like Joe said, it's just kind of a fun record. It's kind of corny 80s pop, but it works. It's an enjoyable listen. Yeah, I don't know. It's 80s to the max. You've got a Mike Oldfield cover and Hugh Padgham mixed it, and some of it's a little goofy, but I don't know. It works. I think there's enough like legit moments like One on One and like the really good vocal performances that keep it from teetering over the line into like complete goofiness. And yeah, I think it's just a pretty good record. It's their best selling record. I think it's far from their best record, but still fun, still good. 3.5 stars.
My number 7 is Whole Oats, the debut. I've got it at 2 stars. I didn't really care for it, and you guys reviewed it well. It does not sound like any other Hall & Oates record or what you would expect. But when I saw their debut was from like, what is this, 1972 or whatever, I'm like, man, what the hell could this possibly sound like? And I guess this is the only thing I could imagine it. I still feel it's quite vanilla, which is good for actual Oates, but not really for music. Guitar on this early album is actually a nice, pleasant surprise, though. It has like a Jerry Garcia jangle to it a little bit. I think Joe mentioned America. I kind of hear some of that. I think the singing is on point, professional, technically good. I just wish Daryl Hall was a more interesting sound to me. Like, there's definitely a measure of craft and vision to the Hall & Oates catalog and on this album, but just not my flavor. One thing that I did really get on this album and throughout the whole catalog, which never really connected with me, Flight of the Conchords are basically just doing a Hall & Oates impression, like with the way his voice, their vocals bounce and kind of lift and do everything and the way they play off each other. I totally hear it. I think he's just doing a Daryl Hall impression, both of them at times, and it's hilarious. The mix of soft rock and folk and soul is nice. It's mostly folk, though, let's be honest. And it's decent. I'm not crazy about the sound of the keys. Some of the horns work are nice. Steel guitar is decent. But I almost feel like this album is just too much influence. And obviously, they never play off what they did on this album. It's a little bit Elton John. It's a little bit of the band. It's a little bit Anne Murray. And like, they obviously needed to go the pop route because they didn't really have the rootsy feel to pull off this folk kind of sound. Don't really see any like unique artistry or desire or passion, but I think Joe said it best. Like, it's nice, it's pleasant, it's there. It's not monumental to the genre it's in at this moment. It kind of just blends in. I think some of the lyrics, I don't think lyrics are the strong part of this catalog at all. And on this album, you get some bad ones like "Is your neck bothering you, lazy man?" and stuff like that. I don't like their wording. It's a bit of a snooze, but it is kind of one of their more pleasant sounding albums to me. So I've got it as high as number 7, but I still can really like it. 2 stars for Whole Oats.
Will Hall Notes break the 3-star barrier? We shall find out. I'm still rolling along at 4 stars. Still, I mean, these albums aren't high 4 stars. Like I'm not close to like 4.5 stars for anything yet. So don't get like crazy. I just think they're all very enjoyable. And the number 7 on here grew because I had it down at 3.5 stars and kind of on the lower end. But it grew. It grew on me. I got Daryl Hall and John Oates, the Silver album, if you will. It's the one with them looking just super androgynous on the cover because that was the thing to do in 1975. So after War Babies, which was Todd Rundgren, they go back to Abandoned Luncheonette style, Blue Eyed Soul, Philly Soul. They're from Philadelphia. So they bring in that, Tom Bell and the strings and all that stuff, which is a great sound. I don't know. I'm not going to give it away, but I wish they'd stayed with the power pop Todd Rundgren stuff a little bit more. But I think, they get back to what they're probably best at here. And it works. I think all of these songs, except for the final song, Soldering, which is a really bad like reggae cover. Everything else works. Sarah Smile's awesome. I love Sarah Smile. It's got that like sexy guitar intro, and it brings in those, nice Philly sounding R&B groove, the shy kind of tentative vocals. And then one of my favorite like 7 seconds of music is when the strings get big and you have that cool little rising progression in the bridge there. Just such a cool, like unexpected, just like awesome little piece of music there. At 220, I believe, is the good stuff. You got Leland Sklar on bass, so the bass rules throughout. Jim Gordon and one other person, I think, on drums. 2 people, Ed Green, Mike Baird, but the drums just fantastic throughout. So the rhythm section is immaculate, and there's a lot of just great little songs. Gino, the manager, is a lot of fun, little like power pop in there. Ennui on the Mountain is great, good high energy rocker. If you get rid of Soldering, and I think that's what tripped me up the first time I listened, I was like, you're ending on Soldering, and it's just like this big, awful reggae cover, and it kind of taints the whole album. But I went back, I listened to it, and better than my first impression. So a nice solid 4 stars for Daryl Hall and John Oates.
All right, here comes one of the bigger surprises of the video. My number 7, War Babies. I'm putting the Todd record at number 7. I think it's one of the biggest outliers in their discography, perhaps their least R&B influenced record. Todd produces, and he adds a bunch of lead guitar, and all of it's awesome. And you got John Siegler and John Willie Wilcox from Utopia as the rhythm section. I don't know where to interject this into the video, but it needs to be said that Todd and Daryl sing so much alike. They have almost the exact same voice. So Cram's reaction to this discography is not boding well for an eventual Todd Rundgren discography because they sing so similarly. But I think really around this time is when it becomes undeniable. From this point on through the rest of his life, Daryl sounds almost exactly like Todd. And they have so many of like similar inflections and mannerisms in the way they sing. It's just uncanny. Anyways, the reason it's down here at 7, I think it's a good record. I got it at 3.5 stars, but to me, it sounds like a group trying to figure out their identity and without really knowing what they want to be, kind of left the door open for Todd to have a huge impact and maybe even too much. As a Todd head myself, it's really cool to hear what Todd does with Hall & Oates, and it's cool to hear some of like the wilder, more adventurous jamming on a Hall & Oates record. The solo section, especially on 70 Scenario, I think is really awesome. But as cool as it is, and as much as I like it, it never really feels like, yes, this is what Hall & Oates should be doing. It doesn't really play to their strengths that much, and it doesn't feel completely natural for them to be in this space so much. So I don't know, maybe that's hindsight a lot, knowing what they went on to do and all the hits they went on to have and the hit makers they became. Maybe knowing that, it's easy to say that this doesn't feel natural for them, but I don't know. It's cool. I like it. It's a 3.5-star record, but I think, it doesn't feel like them. So it feels like a Todd Rundgren record. And if I put this among Todd's records, it would not be one of the better ones. So 3.5 stars, number 7, War Babies.
All right, let me clear a few things up. I think Hall sounds a bit like, I can definitely see sounding like Todd Rundgren. I'm not crazy about Todd Rundgren as a singer. I love him as a musical mastermind, producer, guitarist, influencer. But to me, Daryl Hall sounds exactly like Lou Gramm from Foreigner, more than anybody. I hear that a lot. Number 6 for me, Joe said, will we get up to 3 stars? Will Cramser like an album? 2.5 for Bigger Than Both of Us, which means I didn't like it. Super 70s gloss and funk and soul back together again. Solid opener. Big sweeping strings, thumping bass, sensual saxophone. Never liked Rich Girl. Again, like there are a few of their hits that I like a good bit. Rich Girl's not one of them. Crazy Eyes is okay. The Reeds are nice. This is their Blue Eyed Soul, but like they're kind of big stadium anthem, like to the extreme hair, like not hair metal sound, but like the way they just fill in everything with their Blue Eyed Soul here. And it's got a big, robust sound and production. Do What You Want. He's not pulling off the vocals at all. Way out of his reach, I think. Carrie, I like. I like Carrie. I like the intro. I like the super 70s hook on the synths. And the piano and rhythm section is really good. Probably my favorite on the album. The lyrics on this album are troublesome for me. They're quite trite. It's like a sophisticated Mentos commercial throughout. London Luck and Love is decent. It's wide-eyed and hopeful and kind of lame. Room to Breathe is okay, but kind of wimpy attempt at rock. I don't like when they throw in these like rockers during this era. It doesn't work for me. You'll Never Learn is decent. Just a bunch of songs that are decent that I didn't really like. I've said enough until I have to change my narrative. So number 6, Bigger Than Both of Us. 2.5. I'm up to 2.5 now.
Okie dokie. My number 6 is going to be Private Eyes. Watching You. Can't start off an album much better than the title track, which is basically just Kiss on my list with a jagged like guitar part. It's got that same like bouncy piano. It's like the same mannerisms. It doesn't matter. It's phenomenal. It's such a good track. Absolutely love it. Just everything about it. The hand claps, the jittery bass line, the perfect backing vocals. I really love the 80s backing vocals that Oates does, just kind of accentuating and adding color and richness. And he got a nice serrating guitar solo in there. I don't see what more you could ask for in 80s pop. I can't go for that as a friggin' classic. That beat and bass line. It's copied so many times, sampled so many times. It's like a hallmark of just everything. It was one of like the few big crossover hits into like the R&B charts and everything, which is cool. Everybody likes that track. And these 80s albums, I definitely think the singles overwhelm. They're not nearly as balanced as the 70s stuff. I really like a lot of the album cuts in the 70s. The 80s, it's basically how good were your singles. Did It in a Minute, super poppy, fun. And some others say, looking for good signs. It sounds a lot like a Billy Joel kind of new wave. Like it's not new wave, but they're like dipping their toe. in that like more ironic sort of jittery, jagged, whatever you want to call it, stuff. And it doesn't quite work, but nothing embarrassing. Same with Head Above Water. It's a solid rocker. Your Imagination. There's a cool synth part in it. And it's a fine album. If it didn't have Private Eyes, I can't go for that and did it in a minute. It would be like a 3-star, pretty average album. But those hits, man, they knew how to do it in the 80s. So instead, it's a 4-star album. Private Eyes, 1981.
Hey, I'm still at 3.5 for my number 6, which is Along the Red Ledge, the first of the David Foster albums, which it's a bit more polished, but way less so than the next one, Ecstatic. A ridiculous roster of players on this. You've got Caleb Quay and Kenny Passarelli and Roger Pope making up the core band. You also get contributions from George Harrison and Robert Fripp and Todd Rundgren and Jay Graydon and Steve Lukather and Steve Picaro and Rick Nielsen and Dick Wagner. So yeah, just a ton of amazing players. I think it reins in the eccentricities that Beauty on a Backstreet had, but I don't think it completely suffocates them the way the David Foster production would do on the next record. You still get some rock and roll stuff here. You still get some stylistic excursions. It's not quite so formulaic and not so heavy on the pop. The Last Time, I think, is pretty interesting, kind of their take on Be My Baby or Don't Worry Baby through the Beach Boys. I think that track is sort of emblematic of them starting to shift more towards pop, but it's a good tune. It has a nice George Harrison solo on it. Hall's vocals on Have I Been Away Too Long, I think, are fantastic. There's some great guitar on that as well. Lots of space in the arrangement. Don't Blame It on Love feels like a kind of a Rundgren ripoff. Specifically, it sounds a lot like Out of Control from his Hermit of Mink Hollow record, which came out the same year. The song quality on this record, I think, is a little mixed. Alley Cats and Pleasure Beach, I don't think are that great. And it's not as interesting as the previous record, but I think there's still some really good songs, and I think the vocals on the record are pretty great across the board. So good record, 3.5 stars.
My number 5, Big Bam Boom. This is closer to the 80s sound that I like. You guys are right, I love 80s pop hits, but the early 80s doesn't do it so much for me until you hit like that British new wave stuff like 82, 83, 84. This obviously is different than that. I'm just giving you a timeline. Do I get up to 3? No, I didn't like this album. I just didn't mind it. Out of Touch, great. Just missed my top 10 songs tomorrow. I think it's terrific. So I don't, like, me and Jason were talking before this. He was like, were they giving you Monkees vibes? Let me make one thing clear. I like Hall & Oates exponentially more than I like the Monkees. Like, there are tracks that I really enjoy hearing from Hall & Oates, including Out of Touch. But I do like this album for being a big sprawl of sounds that are kind of ahead of its time. They were such a big hit in 1984 that they basically just got like a goodie bag of all of the new equipment and synthesizers and all of that sort of thing. And that's really cool. So this album came out in 1984, but kind of sounds like what everyone else was doing in like 87, 88. There's almost like a New Jack feel kind of in some of the bass and grooves, which would happen 5, 6 years down the road. There's some cool urban and Caribbean kind of influences in the beats. Method of Modern Love is quirky and cool. There's a lot more danceable stuff. Like their pop music before this was kind of straightforward, kind of drive and snap. This one you can really grind on the floor a little bit too. Not grinding. You can grind your foot to it. Like no one's twerking or grinding to Method of Modern Love. And if they are, let me know. I'll go to that club. But there's like big budget mall rock kind of pop here. Bank on Your Love, I like. Really thick and heavy on that beat. I do really dig the sound of this album, like I said, abandoning the fluffy, cloudy softness of the early 80s and that more like electric. It's almost like it became this sound of the 80s more aware of the 80s materialism and just doubled down on that with all the glitter and glam. And I like that. The album does lack their best material songwriting wise, and that hurts it, even though I like the style of this album. Even a song like Going Through the Motions, it almost has like this girliness to it. And I would say like Hall and Oates never really tried to appeal to the youth culture, but in this album, it does sound like they're going for a younger audience. But I do like it. Like traditionally, they're yacht rock, dad pop rock, that kind of stuff, soft rock. This, they're really trying to sound fresh and new. I mean, they literally had fresh equipment. All American Girl is kind of a cool sound. So I really like the sounds and the style and the vibe of this album. I just don't think the songwriting is there. And then after this, they take a break with this, go 4 years without making an album, which is commonplace today. But they lose their relevancy after this record, but kind of doubled down on this sound a little bit. It would have been interesting if they would have just kind of kept churning them out during that break between 84 and 88 to see if they could have dug into this sound, which was revolutionary at the time, with some good hits and songwriting other than Out of Touch. So this was a pleasant surprise for me, even though I didn't like it. It's number 5, Big Bam Boom. Will I get to 3? Will I like an album?
Number 5 is going to be Private Eyes Part 1. Well, actually, Private Eyes would be Voices Part 2. Voices is my number 5. So after the David Foster dalliance, get rid of him, produce the albums themselves. Much different sound. Like this difference between Red Ledge, Ecstatic to this is really wide. This one is it's almost like a thin sounding record, much less of that like AOR, much less of the big Chicago soft rock. And first couple times I had this one way lower. I was like, I don't like that direction. I just don't think it sounds as good, but it grew on me. Obviously, the singles are great. Kiss on My List is amazing. Everything about it, the piano, that kind of harder guitar solo and guitar parts that like screeching a little bit from Jeff Southworth, who I've never heard of, but he played the guitar on it, not G.E. Smith. Just everything. And it's weird. The two biggest hits from this album were co-written by Jana Allen, who was Hall's girlfriend or whatever, and Sarah Allen co-wrote "You Make My Dream." So whatever they did, kudos to them. They don't get talked about in the Hall & Oates legend, but they were right there with "Kiss on My List" and "You Make My Dreams," which are just two of the best singles. I love the DuckTales rubber band bass of "You Make My Dreams." Always thought it was good before 500 Days of Summer repopularized it. Always loved that tune. Every Time You Go Away is great. I can't tell the difference between this and the Paul Young one that went to number 1 in 1985. Like they sound exactly the same. This one's better. It's just better though. This wasn't a single for Hall & Oates, but it was a number 1 eventually. You've Lost That Loving Feeling. I think it fits fine on here. It kind of works with Every Time You Go Away, and it's got the like doo-woppy kind of sound that it's not like their preferred sound at this point, but I think it still has a little bit of that soul and the blue-eyed soul and the Philly soul and everything. So I don't think that's too out of place. Some of the album cuts are good. United State is good. Hard to Be in Love with You is okay. Got a lot of nerve. Like they don't quite have the same sound, and it took a little while for me to get into it because it's like sort of thin sounding, and there's not a lot going on, but I think it's pretty solid still. Even though the backing band isn't on the same level as those session musicians that they were using, the Porcaros and the Sklar and the you know the guitarist after guitarist after guitarist that they brought in for Red Ledge. But I think it works. The new wave kind of like doo-wop, got a lot of nerve, reminds me of like Joe Jackson. So they're bringing that kind of influence. I think they pull it off reasonably well. Again, the singles are all killer. That boosts it from a 3.5-star album to a nice mid 4-star for me for Voices.
All right. My number 5, and still at 3.5 stars, is Abandoned Luncheonette. This one, like the debut, is produced by Arif Mardin. This time they bring in more big gun type studio players. You get Bernard Purdy on here and Hugh McCracken. Still a blend of R&B and folk and soft rock, but I think much stronger tunes this time, livelier performances, and a little more emphasis on the R&B part of that equation. She's Gone went to number 60 at the time of release, but peaked at number 7 after being reissued in 76 after the success of Sarah Smile. When the Morning Comes is cool. I love that synth sound or whatever that is on there. Great lead vocal from Daryl. Las Vegas Turnaround by John Oates, I think, is really good. I love them sharing vocals on that one. Favorite track on it, probably Lady Rain, kind of this dark, mysterious folk rock song, co-written by Daryl and John. Hugh McCracken's guitar on there is really awesome. Then you get this crazy electric violin solo from John Blair, which is really cool. Really unique song in their catalog. It kind of takes what the idea was on Hall & Oates and kind of like figures it out and figures out how to do it well. So I think just a big step forward, even though it's kind of doing the same thing, it's doing it 100 times better. So 3.5 stars. Abandoned Luncheonette, number 5.
All right, my number 4, 2.5 stars. Along the Red Ledge. And obviously, I would never describe any other moment of Hall & Oates discography as gloomy. But to me, for some reason, this one is like maybe the sunniest and the smiliest in some way. And I kind of like that sunshine. I like It's a Laugh. I think the woos are really nice. Like even more so. Like they're definitely a positive, good vibes kind of group. But to me, this is the most, and I'm kind of here for it. Thinner, crisper sound, a little bit more pop streamlined, not as much soul and funky aspects in this era. Soft pop rock focus, maybe a little bit of like AOR in there. You get great guests with merely good work with Todd and George Harrison and Rick Nielsen and Robert Fripp. Like I was really pumped when I heard. I was like, wow, what the hell is this Robert Fripp part going to be in this Hall & Oates album? And I was like, oh, okay. It just seems like they brought a Robert Fripp like guitar part in and just like dropped it in with like heavy machinery, and then just he left. There's definitely a desire for more really like memorable choruses and big hooks here. Like they were always poppy, but I feel like right now they're like, okay, we are going to be a pop band. We have the ability to make these hits. That's what we should be doing. So you get like The Last Time is kind of cool. But I feel like with this poppiness comes even more smooth rock sensations that are just too buttery for me. And it's very unsalted butter, by the way. There's no grime or grit to it. No tang. Have I Been Away Too Long is really boy bandish, but there is some good guitar on it. Alley Cats, little feisty rocker, not really feeling it. Like I said, when they do like, I feel like during this time frame, they were like, all right, we're doing our thing, but we're gonna drop in these like kind of rockers, like new wave rockers. And this one doesn't really do it. It has a terrible chorus. I don't want the band to be a blue-eyed soul pop band that they are, but I'm also at the same time kind of uncomfortable when they get out of that comfort zone. So I really don't know what I want from Hall & Oates, but I want to like them more. Don't Blame It on Love has that Robert Fripp work. It's really good. Just kind of seems out of place to me. There's just, serious music and Pleasure Beach. I don't care for. That one kind of has like an 80s Elton John feel, but there is some decent stuff on this album. So I am going 2.5. I do have it at number 4. Along the Red Ledge. Doing my best here, boys.
Just pass. You don't even need to say anything. Just pass. Pass. Along the Red Ledge. Pass. I'm pretty surprised by both of your lists. I think they are terrible. My number 4, just they make no sense to me. None. Zero. As soon as Jason's pulling out War Babies at like number 8, 3.5 stars, they all went to hell. My number 4, Bigger Than Both of Us. I think it's a fine record. Rich Girl, their first number 1, which is great. I think it's a great song. I love that they were working the word bitch, and you can hear it on like any FM station. I think it's great. It's cutting, it's biting, it's acidic, it's perfect. So that's good. Back Together Again. I feel like Risco should have let off the album. I think that would have been a little bit better. They don't seem, other than like Private Eyes and H2O, they seem like they don't know how to sequence albums that great. Which, at least not in the intro. They seem to be able to finish albums great because Falling, which is the final track on here, is really cool, sort of like progressive pop again. Like they're keep doing like these weirder songs, and I wish they did a little bit more of that kind of stuff, a little less of kind of the generic pop rock, which creeps into something like London Luck and Love here. But when they get a little more interesting and they bring in like that progressive, like it Falling kind of reminds me of like 10cc's I'm Not in Love. It's got like tape effects and echoey stuff, and it's really cool. um and some great songs from Oates. Crazy Eyes I think is real strong. um Back Together Again I think is a good song. I just don't think it's a great opener. You got a nice up-tempo ballad in Carrie. And again, you got killer players all over the place. Leland Sklar on bass, Jim Gordon on drums. So Christopher Bond. You got Bond here, playing guitar and keyboards and stuff. He produces. And I think this is like the start of their poppier sound. Like it's got a little bit of soul, Philly soul and stuff, and blue-eyed soul, but they're definitely leaning more into the pop stuff, the yacht rocky stuff. So I think it all works. It all is fun. Just a really, I mean, it's hard to describe this music because it doesn't like stand out in like any direction really. And it's not like some life-changing record. Like none of these are life-changing records. They're just good, like pleasant, fun pop albums that aren't gonna like, blow your hair back or anything, but they're just good. I enjoyed every single one of these 70s albums. And this is another 4 star. Just totally like none of these are making my top 25 probably in any year that they came out. H2O didn't make my top 25. Like maybe one or two in like these weaker 70s, late 70s years, but it doesn't mean I don't like them. I wouldn't listen to them. They're just good albums that aren't gonna, I don't think they're gonna make anybody's top 25s, but they're good. They're just good albums. They're fun. Enjoy them. That's all they need to be.
My number 4 is the self-titled Daryl Hall and John Oates from 1975. What an amazing album cover. It's their first record for RCA, contained their breakout hit Sarah Smile. Getting back to the blue-eyed pop soul after War Babies, which was kind of like a stop-start kind of thing for them. Not as folk singer-songwriter as the first 2 albums, which I think helps them focus their sound and focus their image a bit, although image-wise, the cover is not helping. I think this is kind of the beginning of them sort of finding their niche. Some of Oates' songs on this one I like. Alone Too Long, which was the second single following Camellia, which was, I think, the first single. Both John Oates songs I like a lot. Nothing at All has an awesome slow groove to it. Unfortunately, Cram, Gino the Manager is maybe my least favorite song on this record, but I do think it shows how they can take an R&B sound and kind of move into a more pop direction with it. Some nice tight harmonies on It Doesn't Matter Anymore. Not their most interesting record. It's kind of safe following War Babies. Kind of like, I don't know. The beginning, like the whole front half of their career is so weird and like stops and starts and like try this, try that. So this one's kind of safe. It feels like the safest bet of anything they could have done after War Babies. But a lot of it works, and I think it sets up the next 15 years for them pretty nicely. It's a good kind of blue-eyed soul record, pop, solid 3.5 stars.
What a load of shit, dude. Gino the Manager is one of the best songs on that album. My dog Gino is awesome. He just got home from class and he was invited to graduate from his class. You don't know what you're talking about with music, and he's the best dog in the world. Number three for me, I've got Abandoned Luncheonette, and I've got it at not one, not two, but 2.5 stars. I still did not care for it. I predict this is Joe's number one. I predict he's like, oh, I got to reconsider putting it in my top five in 1973. Um, it's a big jump from the debut, no doubt. It seemed to be having more fun and packing in more things to small places, which I really like. It's pretty damn good, yachty, soft rock at times. I still don't really think he's my kind of singer. Everything is just turned up and there's more juice to everything. Everything packs more punch. But the songs are a lot more expressive here than on the debut. They don't seem to be fluttering along like on the debut. There's a brand to each track. It's not all just like that kind of folk, like arena from start to finish. When the Morning Comes is really good. Had I Known You Better is quite lovely. I like the soul jazziness on Las Vegas Turnaround. But for me, everything is a bit too smooth and sleek to really love on the album and the band in general. I know I'm repeating myself, but I certainly am impressed with some of their stuff, especially on this album. It just doesn't really affect me. Still, you know, I'm just a kid, pretty cool. Like they have a songwriting prowess that I found on this album that I feel like they kind of abandoned after this, which I was hoping would be like I knew their 80s hits were coming in the 80s, and then there were a bunch of these 70s albums that I'd never really known about. And I thought they would be more like Abandoned Luncheonette, and they would use this as a foundation to build off of. But it kind of dissipates after that. Lady Rain, I dug a lot. Just like there's nothing that Hall and Oates are doing on this album that I don't get from Steely Dan a million times better. You know what I mean? Like that's kind of how I feel. Laughing Boy, I think is a big swing and a miss. I know what they were going for, but I don't think they have that like sardonic quality that like a Donald Fagen does to pull it off. So I really want to like this album. There are things I like about it, but I'm still just at 2.5.
Number three is an album I didn't know existed from the worst of the 70s. It is Along the Red Ledge from 1978. David Foster's the producer, and thank God you can't tell at all. Like you literally would not know he's there. His sound has no effect on the band. It's just pretty much what they've been doing with Christopher Bond um, over the past couple records. We on the Back Street, Bigger Than Both of Us. So this one I didn't have too much expectations for, but I think this one's great. It's a laugh, and the way it segues into Melody for a Memory to kick off the album is fantastic. You have George Harrison showing up, some slide guitar on the last time. Have I been away too long? It's nice, jubilant little pop. It's one, it's a laugh. This is a number 20 hit. Never heard it before. I don't think it's ever been played on the radio to this day. But I don't know. I feel like they could have kept going on this direction. It would have been great. They bring in Caleb Quaye and Kenny Passarelli, who had been with Elton John for a while, and you definitely get some of that like rock of the Westies flavor from Passarelli and Quaye, kind of like those harder riffs coming in where you don't really expect it, kind of the way they did on Rock of the Westies. Because it's this pleasureful pop, and then you kind of have this like deeper hard rock edge, which is very cool. It's a little moodier. The productions are big and epic and full, but they're not schmaltzy like Foster would do later. I Don't Want to Lose You really sounds like Philadelphia Freedom. Don't Blame It on Love. I love the guitar solo from Robert Fripp. I love the way Robert Fripp just like drops one solo in all these artists' discographies, like the one Blondie and like this one. And I know we've done more where it's just like, and I was listening to the album, I was like, okay, this is cool, this is cool. I was like, this is an interesting song, this is weird. Guitar solo pops. I was like, there's no way But then, Fripp had produced Hall's solo album, Sacred Songs, I think around this time. It didn't come out till 80. So they were working together. So, but it's just so obvious it's Fripp that it's hilarious and fun to hear when he drops in. And you also have Jay Graydon and Steve Lukather and Rick Nielsen and Todd Rundgren doing guitar work. So I was trying to like this guitar solo. Who is this? A Rick Nielsen? Like, is he on Pleasure Beach? Todd Rundgren maybe on, I forget which one. I thought maybe that was a Todd Rundgren sounding guitar solo. But that was fun because it doesn't say anywhere which guitarist does which. So that was cool. You got Steve Porcaro and also guesting on keyboards and David Foster and just a bajillion different guest stars, which is cool. And I just think it's great. Pleasure Beach, super fun 60s throwback, serious music. I feel like that maybe has the Todd Rundgren solo on it. Or maybe that's Steve Lukather. It's hard to tell. But it's another hard rocking one with a great power pop chorus. Closes with August Day, which sounds like Stevie Wonder for some reason. Got a great harmonica solo, which I swore was going to be Stevie Wonder, but it's not. It's Les Thompson, who was in the Nitty Gritty Dirt Band. It's an incredible harmonica solo. It's one of my favorite harmonica solos of all time. Just nestled in at the end of this like yacht rock AOR weird ass sound. It's just bizarre, but I love it. I love the way it jumps around and close to 4.5 stars. I'm gonna go 4 still, but this one was a pretty cool listen for me.
I am getting up to 4 stars now. And then number 3, which is bigger than both of us. It has the first of their 6 number 1 singles in Rich Girl. Once again, opening the album with a John Oates song with Back Together Again. A lot of the same players that are on the self-titled record. You get Jim Gordon again and Leland Sklar and Chris Bond. But I think it feels a lot looser this time. You get more strings, more horns, more backing vocals. It feels a lot more confident, I think. Like they finally hit upon a sound that was working with the previous record. So now they feel comfortable. They can kind of dive in. I think, on the earlier records, I think their talent was always apparent, but I think there's some like real mojo finally starting to happen on this one. Daryl's voice on Do What You Want, Be What You Are is sensational. Easily his best to date. Room to Breathe, I think, is maybe the only weak spot on the record. Feels like a little bit of like a requisite rocker, just kind of tossed off and doesn't fit entirely. But otherwise, I think the record is super consistent, a big step forward from everything before it. Just really good, solid. Yeah. Bigger than both of us. 4 stars. Number 3.
My number 2, before I reveal, do you guys think I get to 3?
Yeah, I think you do.
My number 2 is Voices, and I've got it at 2.5. How to feel to be back? Without a doubt, my favorite John Oates vocal performance in this entire catalog. Like lots of feeling and passion and expression, really good tune vocal performance. I like the softer new wave rock feel in this album. I think that's their best marriage of this like era. And the vocals are just much better than anything, bar a few hiccups. I don't like when he drops into that fraud register to go again. They're just too goofy at times. Like I don't think they have a lot of style. I don't know, but the guitar tones are the right kind of early 80s thinness. Big Kids is pretty cool. And with this newfound new wave focus, everything is compact and tight. And I think that serves their pop writing a lot more than these like more relaxed, big yacht, soft rock kind of fluff pieces. It's very stripped down on this album compared to what was before it. Very precise. And if anything, I think it'd use a little bit more atmosphere and synth work. Hard to Be in Love with You is pretty good. Kiss on My List is awesome. So catchy. I am with Jason. I neither like nor understand the You've Lost That Lovin' Feeling dropped right in the middle of this. And it's an album with 4 or 5 songs that I like a good bit, but the album feel and the album listen for me is just not present. Like it's not a good wave to be taken on. It's not a good ride of an album. And a lot of that is just the track listing, like we talked about. You Make My Dreams, what a great song, great groove, great keyboard bass collaboration. It's just great pop music. Every Time You Go Away, very good. I almost forget that this is a Hall and Oates song. The only thing that reminds me that it is a Hall and Oates song is the comedian, I think his name's TJ something, but he's in that Hall and Oates cover band and She's Out of My League, that movie, and they do it. And then I was like, oh, that is a Hall and Oates song. But the album ends terribly. Absolutely awful with Africa and then the doo-wop piece. And once that happens, which is like 25% of the album, you're like, wait, is this a good album? Or are there just like a handful of pretty darn good songs on it? And I think that's the conclusion I come to is like, there's, you know, 12 Hall and O songs I like a lot. 3 of them are on here. So it's my second favorite Hall and Oates album, but I still don't think it's a very good album. I just don't. So when Jason put it, I think you had it at number 11. I kind of agreed
12.
with you because 12, okay. But I was like, yeah, it's not that great of an album. Obviously, I like it a lot more than their other stuff, but yeah. So, Will, I've got one spot left to get a 3-star album to like a Hall and Oates record. We'll see.
I think you'll get there. Number 2. So this is the big one. I'm gonna go with Abandoned Luncheonette for my number 2. Screw you, Cramser. High 4 stars. It's not even gonna make my top 25 in 1973. But I think it's a very nice album. It's very nice blue-eyed soul, little Philly soul, got those strings, that Tom Bell influence. You got a little yacht rock, a little soft rock, a little AM gold. You know, it's very well produced. It sounds great. It's pretty polite. It's nothing, too boisterous. I just think it's really nice, crafted pop, ahead of its time, maybe. Some great members of the band. So this is before, they actually had a real band. So they get to bring in a bunch of session players, Hugh McCracken and Bernard Purdy on drums and a bunch of other people. Great, killer sounding. Everyone plays just phenomenal. It's the early 70s. Sounds amazing. Obviously, and I think the songs are pretty solid throughout. When the Morning Comes is good. I like the Oates tunes. Had I Known You Better Then, Las Vegas Turnaround, I'm Just a Kid to Make Me Feel Like a Man. You got the classic She's Gone. Got that stuttering little synth line, the rising vocals. I think it overshadows the rest of the album a little bit because it's really in that pop vein. And it just sounds like a hit. Like it's a hit. It sounds like a hit. The other songs don't quite have that like hit single quality to them. But I think that kind of, it doesn't hold back the album because you have the one big hit and they get to like branch out. Lady Rain is like folk country rock. I love the electric violin and the mandolin. Some really good just playing. The electric guitar is great. There's great acoustic guitar. The bass is really like recognizable, and they all kind of take turns in the leading role. I think it's really sung excellently. I think the vocals, whether it's Hall or Oates or Hall and Oates, like on Lady Rain, I think they sound just fantastic together. Some great horn parts on Laughing Boy. Every Time I Look at You is really cool, 7-minute long closer. It's got some funkiness, got those horns, a really smooth groove that you'd expect from a band that took so much like from the Philadelphia sound. And I think first side is good. She's Gone's great. Second side with the band and Luncheonette, which I think is great, vivid songwriting. Lady Rain, Laughing Boy, Every Time I Look at You, all just really, really good songs. It's close to 4.5 stars. I don't think it quite stands out enough. Maybe it's just the nature of the beast being Blue-Eyed Soul and Philly soul sound pop band. It just doesn't quite have the uniqueness that I'm looking for like a top 25 1973 album, but it's a very good album and I do recommend it, but still not going to make my top 25 in 1973.
Okay, my number 2 is I don't even know what you guys have left, so I have no idea what's coming still. My number 2 is Private Eyes. I do not like the drum sound on this record, but aside from that, that is pretty much my only complaint. I think they do a lot of things right here. It's still very pop like the previous record, Voices, but it brings a lot more R&B back, a little more soul into the sound, and it doesn't try so much of the goofy new wave stuff from the previous 2 records. And I think the first half of this record, maybe even a little more than half, is pretty killer. Private Eyes, Looking for a Good Time, I Can't Go for That, Mono a Mono, Did It in a Minute. I think that's a heck of a run of good pop songwriting, and it's pretty sophisticated writing as well. Like Private Eyes, I tried learning that for the 80s cover band I was in, and it is, the chord changes are all over the place, and we actually never ended up doing it. It never came together. It is a pretty crazy song to put together. And to have a song that's that complicated and have, such a focused kind of just pop sound, it's like sneaking up on you. The back half of the record, not quite as strong. I'd say if the back half was as strong as the front half, it might get to 4.5 stars, but not so much. Head Above Water, I think, is a really strong side 2 opener. I like Some Men Too to close the album, but a couple of the tracks in between there, not quite as strong as the rest of the record. But overall, just loaded with hooks. It's a really focused, strong pop record, I think. And it does that without feeling like their only aim is writing hits, which I think they were guilty of on Voices and maybe on Ecstatic. It's like, this just feels like them doing what they do, and it just happens to be this catchy. Whereas on Voices, it was like, let's just do whatever we can to have a hit. So I don't know. I think it's good. Very good. 4 stars. Private Eyes.
Right. My favorite Hall & Oates album, I do not like. It is War Babies. And I love it. 4 stars for War Babies. I love this album. It's the only one I like, and I love it. Jason, I will take the Todd mantle from you. If you can't appreciate this album, if it's not your favorite Hall & Oates album, you don't like Todd Rundgren. You just don't. I'll take it from here, kid. You're done. 5 seconds in, Todd Rundgren is all over this with that guitar tone. He's producing, he's doing the heavy lifting on guitar, he's the lead guitar player. And like, everyone's feeding off of it. Daryl is belting out on the opening track, can't stop the music. He's like trying and succeeding at being this rock star. Totally works. The heavier guitar coming in. Yes, it's an outlier album, but like, damn, it's the best record in their catalog, no doubt. This song, the opening track, has cheer, rock, it's full of life. Is it a star? It's screaming Steely Dan, and they nail it. I'm here for it. Like I said, I complained that everything else was like not as good as Steely Dan, but there are moments on this album where it's like on par. Rundgren's a genius. It's so cool. The songs have a lot of drama, action, dynamic. They actually light up. I dig it. Rundgren, just one of the best producers out there. I believe it was the New York Dolls album that I've loved that he took care of for me. Yeah, ripping guitar solo sections everywhere. It's so good. There's cockiness, there's brashness, there's bite. And Todd knows that he can bring that, touch everything with that, but they're still clothed in their more like Blue-Eyed Soul and kind of funk roots. Beanie G and the Rose Tattoo is awesome. This is maybe one of the 5 albums we've ever covered where you owe 95% of the success to a producer coming in. This is unlike anything else. If from here on out it was just Todd Rundgren and the Hall & Oates band, like, I would be here for it. because this album is so freaking cool. It might go up to 4.5. I've only listened to it twice. You're Much Too Soon is great. Like even that song is like really smooth. It's the most Hall and Oates song on the album, but it's still friggin' great. I love the piano on 70s Scenario. War Baby Son of Zorro is so cool. It's got those classic like Todd Rundgren like bellish keys ringing out with like that twisted sci-fi kind of carnival glam all over it. And the mix on the vocals, very Todd, so awesome. Johnny Gore and the Sea Eaters, just amazing. What a way to like if you would have said that song as a closer on a Hall and Oates album, would have been like, you're so full of shit. But it is, and it's awesome. This is a 4-star album that I loved. It's easily the best Hall and Oates record, and it's all because of Todd Rundgren. So this whole thing, I've just spent 2.5 hours, and all I want to do is talk about Todd Rundgren because he makes the entire catalog. It's so awesome.
It makes your dreams come true for Hall and Oates. I hate to agree with Cramser, but it is also my number one. But I have it at 4.5 stars. I'm gonna take that Todd mantle from Cramser, take it right away from him, put it on my shoulders, because this is the best one, and it is because of Todd. And despite it not having like one of those like power singles that Hall and Oates are known for, as far as an album listening experience, this is easily the best, most cohesive. It's got the most interesting lyrics. It has the most interesting sonic qualities to it. And maybe Jason's just a little jaded from over Todd, over Rundgren. Because for me, this has like all the good parts of Todd Rundgren, all like the super pop stuff. I Saw the Light, and those like Blue-Eyed Soul Rundgren stuff, and he's bringing it in here, and it's less of his like weirder sort of off the wall sonic experimentations, because he's giving this power pop crown, this power to Hall and Oates, who are combining it with their Blue-Eyed Soul.
My camera literally vibrated so much. My camera knew Joe was so right and I was so right that it just toppled right over. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
And it's just like the poppiest parts of the Todd Rundgren experience into this Blue-Eyed Soul group, and it's pushing them out of their comfort zone into something I don't think that they even knew that they could do, and it completely works. Is it a star? Well, we'll start at the beginning. Can't Stop the Music, great. John Oates sings his only solo lead on the whole album. Maybe that helps it because Hall definitely has the stronger voice. He's using it a little more in a rock manner here. But there's some jazzy grooves, some Steely Dan, absolutely, that menace, crackling live wire guitar work, solo from Richie Cerniglia on Is It a Star? Beanie G and the Rose Tattoo is great. It's got that complex pop of like early Steely Dan before they went all jazzy and kind of yacht rocky. That like biting Countdown to Ecstasy, Can't Buy a Thrill kind of Steely Dan pop, which I love. You're Much Too Soon, the hallmarks of the Todd Rundgren production experience, like the big maximalist sound, the multi-tracks, and the complex bass lines. And you got those Todd backing vocals, which are great. And even the songs that aren't like totally Todd songs, like Better Watch Your Back, like that funkiness, those little solo bass parts, almost feels like a war song. But then in that pre-chorus, like those big multi-vocal parts, it's just like pure Todd just interjecting like that perfect pop into it. And I just love those little moments where you just like feel the Todd coursing through the songs. It's just really cool. It's a really interesting album on all the levels, and I think Todd just pushes them into a whole new thing. You get the power pop of Todd, the jazziness, the Blue-Eyed Soul, all mixing together into an album that you just unique, I think, in how it sounds, and just sort of like that lightning in a bottle kind of thing, where it's just nothing that they were used to but it pushed them to new heights. So 4.5 stars, the cream of the crop for Hall & Oates War Babies. That could make my top 25. It might in 1974. We shall see.
Joe, that was one of the best reviews you've done, and he makes a great point. The power of the producer is so evident on this record. It's incredible, which should have been our side three, but it will be something different.
Well, I'm glad you both liked it.
How is this not your number one, Jason? Like, how is this not your number one?
So Todd actually has this quote where he says, if you know the kind of record you want to make, I'll help you make it. And if you don't know the record you want to make, I'll make it for you. And to me, this feels like he just made the record. And
which is totally fine. Like, I have no problem with that. Like, it's the best of all the worlds right there.
It's not the best of Todd. Todd has done far better. So it's cool. I like it, but it's not the best thing Todd's ever done.
But you saying that right now seems like you're grading this album as a Todd record and not a Hall & Oates record, because it's clearly the best Hall & Oates record.
Just grading it as a record, the way I grade everything. My number one, and Cram, who would have thought I'd be the one to break this trifecta up? But my number one is Beauty on a Backstreet, which is such a weird record. It's so weird that they went in this direction for this record, because they had seemingly hit upon a sound that was working with the same producer. It's Chris Bond producing again after doing the last two records. And yet this record is so completely different from the two before it. They bring in Jeff Porcaro into the mix of killer players. So you get the Porcaro Sklar rhythm section on all but one track on this record. It's a lot more guitar heavy, more of a rock record, definitely more of a rock edge to it. And it's just so weird for them to go in this direction from where they were, and from having hits like Rich Girl to put out this record, which doesn't have really, I don't even know what the biggest song on this was. It doesn't have like any of their big standout hits really. It opens with Don't Change, which is great. I love the electric piano on it. Creates this really cool vibe that sets up Daryl's vocals really well, has an awesome guitar solo on it. The Emptiness is a super cool, super underrated John Oates track. It's got cool synths, really interesting falsetto breakdown section, and it's got this like weird arrangement. It almost would fit on War Babies, I think. Kind of reminds me of like Band on the Run era McCartney, just kind of bombastic. It's got this really cool build up. Sweet guitar solo on there too. I don't know who's playing it. I think it's Chris Bond playing the solo. Bigger Than Both of Us is good. It's got those really cool chord changes in the chorus, kind of like a Houses of the Holy situation with the title track of the record before being on the next album. Bad Habits and Infections is super weird and awesome. Almost reminds me of 10cc. I think Joe mentioned 10cc at some point during this video, and that is the track that really reminds me of them. It's really campy and over the top and really fun. I think they took some chances and it works. Just a really, I don't know, it's makes no sense that they made this record when they made it. And it fits into their trajectory and their career arc in a really weird spot. And I don't know, it makes no sense, but I like it a lot. 4 stars for Beauty on a Backstreet.
I would not have pegged that for your number one, but
no,
it's definitely not number 16.
I'll tell you what makes no sense. Todd Rundgren coming in, saving this discography, and you putting it at like number 9 or whatever he had it.
7.
Shocking. Yeah, shocking.
I don't know. I just don't think the songwriting on War Babies is that great. There's some great guitar playing. That's the coolest thing about it. Are the songs that good? Can you hum them to me? Do they pass the hum test? No.
Yes, you'll see tomorrow.
What a weird video or ranking this ended up being.
This is by far our most bizarre. Just no one would be able to ever like predict this ever in a million years.
No, I thought for sure Joe would have Private Eyes or H2O or something, and he's like, "Yeah, Crims was right. It's War Babies." Never would have thought. But, yeah. Very weird list for an incredibly unweird band.
Yeah, true. Well, let us know if you saw this coming. What would your predictions have been? Drop it all down in the comments. Let us know what your own favorites are. Make sure you hit the like button, subscribe, hit the bell for notifications, and check the description for Patreon and Twitter and Instagram and all that good stuff. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one.